We're live. Great. So everybody, welcome to the first ever Allen Area Patriots live YouTube meeting. And we have a super special guest. First thing I want to do is go through some of the important things. Introduction. We're Allen Area Patriots. We're one of the first Tea parties to sign up to sue the IRS for being targeted, and we lived through that. That's our kind of our claim to fame, I guess. And yeah, there we go. Scroll. So I'd like to start off with a prayer, and that's part of our strength. We're an overtly Christian group, and I would like to ask people and remind people to pray for our president and pray for our leadership in this country, that they are given the courage, the strength, and the wisdom to do what is proper and right. And I would just like to say, loving God, we thank and praise you for the power of your presence deep within our hearts and the vitality of your presence in our midst. We thank you, O Lord, for this opportunity to come together and celebrate our common call to the healing mission of Jesus in this great country. We thank you, O Lord, for the opportunity to live as free people and pursue any and all activities that glorify you. Bless the many and diverse efforts of our Patriot brothers and sisters that are contributing to the restoration of a better world. Dear Lord, confirm and strengthen our conviction. Be our hope that sustains us in these changing and challenging times. Glory and praise to you. Amen. Our mission statement is to motivate our local citizens. Going the wrong way. To motivate our local citizens to participate in all levels of government for the protection of liberty through awareness, our shared principles, limited government, fiscal responsibility, personal responsibility, national sovereignty, and the rule of law. And to get right to the meat of it, many of y'all know who Bill Whittle is, but I would just like to introduce him. I stumbled onto Bill Whittle at least 10 or 12 years ago, maybe 15. He was doing some little show called Eject, 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 and I got hooked and been following him ever since. And now he has like a whole production company. Bill Whittle Now, Right Angle, Backstage. If you ever get a chance, in fact, he'll be doing the Stratosphere Lounge, I believe, right after he gets done on our program. And that'll be a live stream, and you can go there. Just go to billwhittle.com and you'll find it. He does a deal called Firewall, and one of my favorites is Mr. Virtual President. If it's really, really good. He pretends to be a president, and he gives you basically a State of the Union speech on many different subjects, and then After Hours and We the People. So without too much else, I contacted Bill last week because my finger on the pulse of Collin County and Texas in general was we were kind of in a funk. And I couldn't think of a better person to call to kind of try to help get us out of our little funk was to call Bill. And he loves Texas. He loves Ted Cruz especially, and he's always willing to help. So with that, I'll give you Bill Whittle.
Well, hi, everybody. First of all, thanks very much for the great introduction, but you had me at sue the IRS, to be honest with you. From that point on, I was pretty much in. I'd like to just probably start by pointing out the absurdity of this entire idea, the absurdity of having somebody from California call people in Texas in order to cheer them up My God, if this phone call ever should have been going the other way, this phone call should be going the same way as all of the moving trailers. It's like I understand uh, a lot of changes out there and a lot of unpleasant changes, restrictions, all kinds of restrictions on our liberties, our freedom of movement, and so on. And so I suppose that if we're going to really talk about this seriously, the two things we really need to break down are the impact of the actual virus, and then the impact in terms of our social freedoms and civil liberties and all the rest of it. The short form is they're both serious, but I wouldn't worry about either one of them to the degree that people are really worried about them. I'll give you a little bit of background first. I have a good background in science. I started teaching astronomy in Miami when I was 13, and I understand the basics of science. But what I'm really probably best at is weighing evidence. When I was in high school, I was on the debate team, and you want to talk about a chick magnet. But there we were. And the thing I learned the most about debate was I learned real early in organized debate. I was a member of the NFL, by the way. That was the National Forensic League, not the good one. But what they would do is every year there would be a topic. And when I was a senior, the topic was prison reform. And the way the debate was structured is you would flip a coin at the beginning of the debate, and one team of two people would be the affirmative, and the other team of two people would be the negative. You never knew which one you were going to be. The affirmative would go in there and they would try to make a case. So I'll just give you a quick example, and there's a reason why I'm going down this path here. So, for example, one debate might be that the affirmative team has got a case saying that capital punishment doesn't deter crime. And so the negatives team is to say, well, hell yes, it does. And that's basically how it's structured. But the salient point is this, folks. When it got time to prepare for debate, I didn't know which one, and none of us knew what the topic was going to be. And that meant that I had to go out and find just scads of evidence, index card after index card after index card, showing that that the death penalty does in fact deter murderers. And I also had to come up with hundreds and hundreds of evidence cards that said that the death penalty does not deter murderers. And I learned very, very quickly that you can get a line of experts to the horizon on diametrically opposed, I mean exactly opposed propositions. You will find a line of experts that say yes, you'll find a line of experts that say no. And this was very valuable for me because it taught me that part of what is part of the problems of determining what's real. That's the essence of conservatism, right? Is we live in the real world. We do the best we can to construct a society that is made up of flawed people who have all of the flaws that are in the dictionary. They're inclined to greed, they're inclined to selfishness. They're also capable of great virtue. But we live in the world we live in, and conservatism is about dealing with that as best as we can. So if we're going to figure out what's real, we have to learn how to weigh evidence. We have to learn how to look at what the evidence is, and then ask yourself some common sense questions. And I'll give you a really interesting case just off the bat before we go into some of the details. Whether sometimes you can weigh evidence and tell about things not by what you see, but what you don't see. I'm going to talk about a couple doctors in California in a minute, but when the news that was covering these doctors who basically said we're closing the clinics because we don't have enough patients, we're sending doctors and nurses home because we're empty, we're not doing any business. When the news reported on this, the Kern County, those guys are in Kern County, California. Kern County Public Health Department came out and said, no, these guys are completely wrong. And when the news crew was putting together the video of this 2-minute rebuttal from the health department, they used video of guys in the full biosuits with the full face masks, paper this and everything and so on. And I looked at this video and I realized that those are all Chinese people. So unless Kern County has mysteriously filled itself with Chinese people, which I doubt, what it's telling me is that the video that they're showing to convince everybody how dangerous it is video from China in January. And when I say sometimes the best evidence is what you don't see, is that I can assure you that if the hospitals in Kern County or even in New York for that matter had reached the level of saturation that we'd all feared that it would, then there'd be nothing but video footage of people in the hallways. You'd see nothing but gurney after gurney after gurney in the hallways. You would see lines of people outside the emergency room. When they said that it was backing up in Moscow, I was able to see a photograph of a line of ambulance that went for miles. So that indicated me that was probably true. But even in the case of New York, when they were showing videos about how bad it was in New York, they got busted because they were showing videos from Italian hospitals. So in terms of the people who are most worried about this as a pandemic, as kind of like a real civilization changing kind of pandemic, we are now well past the worst of at least this initial phase of it. And I have not seen a single piece of footage anywhere from any hospital in the country that gave me the impression that the healthcare system was so saturated. I haven't heard of a single case of what we heard in Italy, where it's like, I'm sorry, you're too old, we can't treat you, just go home and die. We haven't seen any of that. There's compelling evidence that that emergency rooms now are empty. I have friends who've gone for broken wrists, broken shoulders, and so on, and they just walk in there and they just say there's nobody in the emergency rooms, first time ever. So that kind of stuff I weigh heavily because it's not based on a computer model. It's not an estimate, it's not a projection. It's actual real data. So with that example in terms of how to weigh data, why don't we just take a look at this whole thing and try to get some kind of handle on how serious this thing is. Sometimes when you're dealing with something like this on a spectrum, it's best to examine what the two poles are. In other words, there is no solid, definite answer. We can't just pin it down, but we know it's within a certain range. So since it's within a certain range, this pandemic, why don't we look at what the two ranges are? One end of the spectrum says that this is nothing, that it is nothing more than the flu. It's just the whole thing is a gigantic political move. It's no different than the flu, and this whole thing is over nothing. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is that this is a civilization-ending disease that's going to require us to stay locked down until 2021, and that any contact with somebody out there is just death for you and your family and everybody you know, and so on. And so I think we can agree that the truth lies somewhere between these two poles. So now we have to find out where that is. Even though the numbers of deaths increase every day, the mortality of this disease, the number of people that it kills, goes down every day. Seems like a contradiction. It seems like, well, the numbers of people that die are increasing on a daily basis. How can the mortality rate go down? Well, it's going down because more and more and more we're finding out that hundreds of thousands of people are testing positive for COVID-19. They didn't even know they had it. Or maybe they had a sniffle, or maybe they thought it was last season's flu. Instead of coming here in the end of January, it's beginning to look very compelling that it actually got here in September, October, perhaps, and that a number of people who experienced a bad flu season last year may have actually been exposed to this COVID-19 virus. And I'll get to that virus specifically in a minute. So the more people that test positive, the less fatal the disease gets, even though the number of people that die is staying the same. If you have one person dies out of 10 people, you got a 10% mortality rate. If it turns out that 100 people have it and that same one person dies, now you got a 1% mortality rate. And so every single day, as we test more and more people, the percentage of people who have been exposed to COVID-19 and who die from it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, smaller, smaller. And that is happening, and it continues to go on. So this virus is nothing like as dangerous as we had originally thought it might be. And at the same time, it is more dangerous than the flu. It's somewhere in there, and it's starting to look like, with just a rough guess, is it if we hadn't done all the social distancing, it might be perhaps 2 or 3 times more fatal than the flu. But the problem with this virus, with COVID-19, is that it does not exist. It had not existed before. That's why it's called a novel coronavirus. It's brand new. And I'll get to this in a minute. I'm going to make a major effort here for all of you watching to be clear on what appears to be data. And when I'm giving you my opinion, I'll mark that off as my opinion. It's my opinion based on data that I've seen is that this virus was manufactured. But in any event, whether it was manufactured or not, it's new. And because it's new, the human population has not seen it before, which means we have no immunity to it whatsoever. And that's what made it so dangerous, was that nobody was protected against this in form of immunity. But now that we've been through an awful lot of this, and the numbers get more and more solid every day, what we're finding is that this is not nearly as deadly a disease as we thought. And the main problem with determining how deadly this disease is that there has yet to be, to my satisfaction anyway, a protocol, a legal definition between the difference between dying of COVID-19 or dying with COVID-19. And this is a fundamental difference. When I first started thinking about this, I heard about the first death in America, the first fatality that was attributable to COVID-19. And I said, well, I want to know something more about that guy. I want to know if this guy was a middle linebacker for Texas A&M, let's say. If it turns out that this was a 20-year-old, 300-pound, totally fit person who developed this and just dropped dead, that's going to have an effect on what I'm going to look at this picture as. It turned out that the person who was the first fatality was in their 70s, was already, I think, in renal failure, is having heart failure and so on, and the difficulty in breathing basically pushed this person over the edge, but a flu or a cold might have done that as well. There are people that have died specifically as a result of this virus. And so to say that there's nothing to it is also not true. It is much worse than the flu. And if you look at or listen to the reports of doctors and nurses who are in the front lines in New York City, this isn't the flu. They have said, I've heard from hundreds of doctors now, that they've said, we've never seen anything like this. There was a doctor in New York that committed suicide just a few days ago. She said she just couldn't stand it. There were people dying from before they could get them out of the ambulance. So on one hand, not such a big deal. On the other hand, people are dropping dead. So where's the truth? What do we know? Well, we know it's extremely contagious. That's bad if you're trying to protect yourself from it, but it's also good, which means more people have it than we probably know. There's a fair chance that you have it already and don't even know it. We do know that this particular virus behaves in a kind of an unusual way. A lot of times viruses go after the very old and the very young, because very young people don't have any immunity left. But since no one has immunity to this because it's brand new, we find that virtually, I think in the world, there might be 5 or 6 cases of people under the age of 10 who've died directly of this. It doesn't affect 0 through 10, it's nobody. 10 through 20, it's still nobody. When you get into the 20 to 30 age bracket, it's 2 or 3%, 40 or 50, and it pretty much doubles after that. So this disease likes older people and people with pre-existing conditions. And that's a lot of people. So I think what we have to do, first of all, and this would be a nice change of pace, instead of this constant for ongoing, never ending backbiting and criticism, I think the first thing we all ought to do as Americans, all of us, is we ought to give ourselves a gigantic, enormous pat on the back, because we have been through tremendous hardships on this. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people are depressed. A lot of people are miserable. Nobody likes being told to stay in their house. But in my opinion, we have saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans by doing this. And there are some people who say, hey, well, it's here, we just got to take our losses. I don't look at lives that way, and I suspect when you think about it, you don't either. If you're a member of this organization, you're watching this now, you're one of those people that are disgusted by the idea of a national healthcare system, and the thing that disgusts you the most about it is the thing that is most disgusting about it is the idea that, well, sorry, we're out of resources, you just have to go home and die now. We don't treat our people that way, and we have made enormous sacrifices, but we've made them for the best possible reason. We've done them to save the lives of our countrymen, and there will come a point, and we are approaching that point where the damage that's being done economically is greater than the damage done that would have been done if we hadn't done anything. But so far, they're not even close. We have saved tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And those lives are precious. Every one of them matters. And so I'm enormously proud of what we've done as a country. And I'm enormously proud of how we've done it as well. I'll get to how we've done it when we get to the civil liberties aspect of it. So what we've got is we've got a new virus. And again, there's good news and bad news. The one thing that I've been trying to do since I've been talking about this, I do a version of Stratosphere Lounge called the Chronosphere Lounge, and I talk specifically about this pandemic. And so, of all of the things that the media has failed at, and they have failed so spectacularly that I just simply, I'm going to need to be restrained if I see a news van, within rock throwing distance. But the worst thing that the media has done, aside from all the political manipulation, is they have never, ever during this process, ever have they provided perspective. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. They show a continuing graph. It's either a line graph, or it's an expanding blob, or it's a bar graph. Here's the number of people that have died of COVID-19. Every day that number gets bigger. And I have known from the beginning that it is human nature to say, my God, look at this. 10,000, 20,000, 30, 40, 50,000 people have died from this. This is terrifying. I don't want to leave my house. But when I say perspective, you have to understand that the people, the elites in the media, think that you're an idiot. They think that you're an idiot because they're idiots. They think that you're helpless because they're helpless. They think you're going to panic because they panic. Famous story of the guy, I've forgotten his name because it's not worth mentioning, but he tweeted out, oh, I went home and sobbed. This is a CNN news anchor. I went home and sobbed. I let the tears escape. It's like, man up, man. If giving people the news is causing you to have an emotional breakdown, you're in the wrong line of work. So where does this thing belong? When I say perspective, what we should have been doing is we should have been giving an accurate, completely accurate toll of what the number of deaths from COVID-19 is, and we'd be watching that bar graph grow. But next to it, we should have had a bar graph of here's all the people that have died of the flu since January 1st. And next to that, here's all the people that have died of obesity since January 1st. And next to that, here's all the people that have died of cancer since January 1st. Here's all the people that have died of traffic accidents. And way up there is all the people that have died of heart disease since January 1st. When you do nothing but count the COVID deaths, it looks like COVID is the only thing that is going to kill you out there. And it's just not true. Since we know, since we're familiar with the fact that people in this country die of heart disease, they die of cancer, they die of traffic accidents, they die of obesity, they die of diabetes, and so on. Since we've grown up with this, that's become what I like to call part of our ambient risk. This is the risk that we all understand exists out there. And every time we've left the house prior to this pandemic, every time we've gone out of the house, we knew there was a chance to get hit by a car. We knew that our chance of dying of heart disease was there if we had another, helping of ribs at the barbecue, and all of this. The risk was out there. We knew what it was. We grew up with it, and that's ambient risk. And so we were perfectly happy going out there into the world, and we will be going back there out into the world again once this ambient risk of COVID-19 gets factored into all the other risks that we face. The only people that are safe in this country are people that never leave the house, and they're not safe either. So we all know that safety is a relative term. We all know that nobody's really safe. We know that a tree branch could fall on you, get hit by a truck, you could slip in the bathtub, any number of things. But we know that that risk is really pretty small, and so we go on with our lives. Now, the bad news is that thanks to the Communist Party of China, there's a new virus in the world. And folks, this virus is never going to go away. It's the gift that keeps on giving. COVID-19 is going to kill people every year for the rest of time. That's just the fact. Uh, and so on the scale of things that you can die from, there's a new column now. And that wasn't there before. And I'd be lying if I told you otherwise. When a vaccine becomes available, that number of people that will die from that will go way down. But it's going to be there forever. It's part of the environment now, and it's not going to go away. Now, that's the bad news. You think, oh my God, there's something new to die of. But the thing that you really do need to keep in mind, honestly, is that if we're adding a little bar graph that's this big of COVID-19 deaths, this is something we have to deal with from now on. Let's not forget that on that same scale, there was a bar graph that went to the ceiling from people who used to die of smallpox and yellow fever and typhus and malaria and all of it. And those things have gone. Tuberculosis, all of those things are far, 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 far more fatal than this particular infection is. They're gone. And for somebody who lived in the age of tuberculosis or polio or smallpox or whatever, the fatality rate from this disease is minuscule. They would have traded any one of those diseases for this one, and rightfully so. It turns out that we traded all of them. They're essentially gone as far as medical science is concerned. Every single day we make new breakthroughs in terms of cancer treatment. That cancer column gets smaller and smaller. So in terms of looking at your life and your risk and your ability to go outside, despite the fact that there's a new virus in town, there has never been a healthier time to be alive. There's never been a chance of you less likely to die of disease than today. And one of the things that we found is that, I'll start to transition into the political stuff now. One of the things that we found is that this social distancing, which has been draconian, but again, has saved a lot of lives. I know this is going to come off sounding strange, but I'd be willing to bet $1 on it. I'd be willing to bet you that when this year is up, come December 31st of 2020, we're going to find that fewer Americans died this year than they have at any time in the last 25, 30 years, or maybe ever, as a percentage of the population. Because this social distancing has eliminated the flu for the year. There is none. And the reason I know this is, you might want to write this down. It's a handy little thing to have. It's a result of free enterprise and a private company. Imagine my surprise. There's a website out there called healthweather.us. It's a product of a private company called Kinsa. Kinsa makes thermometers. They make smart thermometers. I didn't think there could be a smart thermometer, but turns out there can. So let me give you this as some evidence. Kinsa sold about 180,000 thermometers throughout the United States. Now that's a significant number. Usually when they do polls for who's going to get elected, they might have a 3, 4, 5,000 people sample, but 180,000 people is a significant sample. And the Kinsa thermometer is just a high quality thermometer, but it's got a little Bluetooth in it, and it can talk to your phone and keep track of your temperatures and health and so on. And if you choose, you can upload it anonymously to the Kinsa website, where the Kinsa website is taking a look not at COVID-19. It is utterly incapable of detecting COVID-19, but it does give you a real-time, day-by-day view of who is having a fever, who's running a fever in America. All it's doing is measuring body temperatures and goes up online. You get 180,000 samples a day, and then they plot how much is the national average or the county average. You go right down to the county on this. How are we seeing more fevers than we should or less? And on this map, you can see there's like a dotted blue line, and it's decreasing over time. That dotted blue line are the number of fevers that we would expect to see year after year after year as a result of the flu. And as we get into the summer, that number gets lower. And as we get into the winter, that national average for flu gets higher, and so on. And so what these Kinsa thermometers are measuring and what the healthweather.us is measuring is not COVID-19. It's how many people are sick. And sick is defined by running a fever, because that's all this thing determines. But a fever is one of the constants of people who have a serious case of the COVID-19. Many of us have minimal symptoms, no fever. Many of us have it and don't even know it. But for the people who are seriously ill, fever is basically one of the uh, irreducible symptoms of this. And watching what has happened to the number of fevers in America, because that's all it's trotting, is that you could see, I'll see if I can do this in reverse. You could see the numbers kind of coming down with the flu, and then COVID-19 comes up, and then these numbers start getting higher and higher. Then they go out of the error bars. Now you start to see red dots. We're seeing more and more and more fevers in this particular place, and then all of a sudden they just start to go down. That's when the social distancing went in. And what's astonishing is that the number of fevers not only went down back to the norm of what we would expect to see for flu, but it blew right through that, and now it's a flat line at zero. Essentially, there is 0 people in the country. That's the closest whole number of people who are running fevers right now. And so it's entirely possible that when you count the fact that we've essentially not only broken the chain of infection for COVID-19, but also for the seasonal flu, and then not nearly so many traffic accidents, heart attacks are way, way down from the people who are just, everybody's anxious, but not as stressed perhaps as they used to be in traffic and so on. You could make the case that this could be the year where we see the fewest American deaths because of the social distancing, but we've paid an enormous price for it. So we can't keep doing this, obviously, and nobody wants to. So now more into the politics of it. Um, I'm constantly out there trying to defend conservative values, and I'm used to being attacked by the left. But when I get attacked from the right, it hurts in a lot. It just, I'm more tender there. And I have seen arguments saying, Bill, I can't believe you're going along with this unconstitutional power grab, and what about our right to assemble and all the rest of it. Now, I live in California. I used to live in the United States, but I moved here in 1988. But I can just give you my personal take on this. California was the first state to have a quarantine in place kind of thing. And they read it as an order, then they issued it as an order. But in the fine print, it said, we're not going to use the police to enforce this, which means that whether they want to call it an order or not, it's a request. If there's no teeth behind it, then it's a request. And I'm just going to give you my personal perspective on this. Everybody's different, and I know there's a lot of disagreement on this, and now we're down to opinions. But in my opinion, I personally did the quarantine, the stay at home, and the masks because I love this country. I love the people in it, and that seems a small price to pay for saving people's lives. And the quarantine was the same. We're well past the time to be coming out of that, and I'll close with that in a minute, and then we'll take some questions. But I did it voluntarily. If I had seen people going down the streets of my neighborhood, if I'd seen Humvees with troops and rifles going down the streets of my neighborhood enforcing my stay-at-home order, I would have an entirely different attitude towards this than I do. The way I look at it is that everybody that I've seen, at least in my neighborhood and my friends, have done it to various degrees of reluctance because it seemed like the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, and it has undoubtedly, without question, no question, saved tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And when you think about 3,000 people killed on 9/11, New York was having a 9/11 rate of casualties every day and a half, every 2 days for a week and a half, 2 weeks there. So to me, that's worth it. But now it's time. Now it's time to come out of it. It's time to go back to work. So I thought what I might do is just spend a little bit of time telling you what to expect. I think as Texas is the first state to go back to work, which doesn't surprise me in the slightest. We talked about the entire purpose of social distancing was to flatten the curve. So let's just talk about what that means, because not many people are still completely clear on this. I'll try and draw this graph backwards for you here. So here's the number of people who are sick, right? And here's time. And so if we did nothing, this infection would come in, it would spread exponentially, it would go very, very high, and then it would come down relatively quickly and go out. People would either recover or they'd die. Here, is the healthcare ability of America. Let's say it's 3,000 beds in your county or your state or whatever the case may be. The social distancing was never designed to stop people from getting infected. This is the most important thing that nobody is being clear on, especially now on the back end of this. All of this social quarantine, all of this stay-at-home stuff, all of it was never really designed to stop people from getting COVID-19. What it was designed to do was to slow down the number of people that were getting it at any given time so that we could cope with it. In other words, when they say flatten the curve, if this is what our healthcare system can cover, and we have done nothing, then pretty quickly we get to this point, and from this point, all the hospital beds are saturated, and more and more and more and more cases. Now hospital rooms are filled, hallways are filled. People who are in car accidents die because they can't get to a bed because the bed is filled with COVID-19 people. The people who are really seriously ill of COVID-19 can't get to the hospital bed because people are kind of ill. That's the nightmare, was that the hospital system and the medical system was not able to cope with it. And the reason we should be patting ourselves on the back is because we in New York, it was touch and go in New York, but New York never got saturated. I don't know, there's been some dispute about the numbers, but when we sent the USNS Comfort, the hospital ship, to New York, it was never designed to take the COVID-19 cases. It was designed to take all of the other cases that a hospital normally deals with, keep the infection off of the ship so that the hospitals presumably were going to be dealing with nothing but COVID-19 people. Now, my understanding was that that ship has either 800 or 1,000 hospital beds. I don't remember which. But Comfort never had more than 150 people on it during the entire time it was in New York. For the first couple of weeks, there was something like 7 or 8 people in it, and it's leaving now. So that tells us that even in the worst place in America, and New York is half of the deaths in the country are in New York City, half of them. Even in the worst place where it really, really was touch and go for a while, this social distancing and these measures that we took stopped the healthcare system from saturating. There's a lot of 1,000-yard stares out there from people who are working in New York clinics, especially. A lot of people saying they've never seen anything like it. So for those people who say, "Oh, this is just no, it's not the flu. It's not just another bad season." They were really touch and go there for a while. But we did it. So now, as we start to get back out there, what happens next? Well, we were talking earlier about these doctors. Dr. Erickson, who runs a series of emergency rooms, they're like urgent care centers in Kern County, California, which is a low population county. And he basically shook up the whole world by saying, we are going out of business because we don't have enough patients. We are sending doctors home. We're sending nurses home. The healthcare department came back with that, and YouTube banned them, and everybody else just any good news is instantly attacked for political reasons, and also because they think we're children and idiots. They think that if we hear one piece of good news about hydroxychloroquine, then we're all just going to go out and start shooting our guns in the air and licking doorknobs. That's what the media thinks of us, and that's the best possible spin you can put on it. I think most of the spin is the more people die and the more people that are out of work, the better chance there is to beat Donald Trump in November. And I find that to be the most disgusting thing I've seen in American politics. And the hydroxychloroquine thing is a perfect example of that. So anyway, the point is, were we able to keep the number of infections below our ability to treat them? Yes. In some cases, we've done it so effectively that we didn't just flatten the curve, we cratered it. Now there's not enough people for hospitals to stay in business with. And they're calling people saying, come back, get your elective surgeries, come back and do all this other stuff. We're laying off doctors. What's important when I say weighing evidence, what's important is when that doctor said we were sending nurses and doctors home, we were laying them off. If we had had the kind of numbers that it looked like we were going to have without this radical work that we did, then they wouldn't be sending nurses home from Kern County or doctors. They'd be sending them to New York. There may not be enough work for them in Kern County, but they wouldn't be going home sitting on their hands. They'd be in New York or New Orleans, but that's not what happened. because we did it. And it's about time somebody said so. It's about time somebody came out and said, we made enormous sacrifices and we kicked the living crap out of this thing is what we did. And now we have to recover our economy. And a lot of people have been hurt and jobs have been hurt, but jobs can be recovered and lives can't. And so now it's time to go back to work. And so what's going to happen now? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is that the number of cases will increase. This is not only expected, it's the plan. The media has covered this pandemic and covered social quarantine as if it was a storm, like a tornado, and we're all going to go into our basement, and then the thing's going to blow over, and when it's blown over, we'll be able to come back and it's gone. That was never the case. All we had to do was slow the rate of infections down so that it never exceeded our ability to treat the people who we could treat. So when Texas goes back to work on Monday, God bless you. God bless you all. What an amazing place. What's going to happen is this. No one is going to go back and immediately just start licking doorknobs. Everybody, American people have handled this with astonishing common sense and wisdom and cheeriness, by the way. I don't know what it's like in Texas. I'm sure it's even better. But here in California, during this entire time, I have found people to be aggressively friendly, aggressively cheerful. You go to the supermarket and where everybody's, just telling the people there that they're heroes and stuff. It's been magnificent. The politicians, not so much, and the news media needs to go to hell. But the rest of us have done an amazing job. So as you guys start to go back to work on Monday, you're going to start seeing the number of cases increase. The huge majority of those cases will be invisible. You won't even know it. If the current data is, well, it is correct, of the total number of people that we test that have tested positive for COVID-19, significant portions, I'm quite sure it's the majority, never even knew they had it. So as we go out there and become infected, almost all of us will not feel anything. Some of us will have a headache and mild flu symptoms. Some of us will take it harder, and some of us will take it very hard. We have never, as this doctor in California points out, we've never done what we did before. This never happened before. Throughout human history, there have been these diseases and pandemics, and we've always quarantined the sick. We've never quarantined the healthy before. That's the first time in human history this has ever happened. So as we start to go back to work, what we want to do is we want to do sensible things. We want to keep using the masks if we can, and so on and so forth. My friend Scott Ott, who I work with, works at the Nebraska Furniture Mart in Texas. And when they go back to work on Monday, they're going back to 25% of their normal capacity of the store. They're not going to let in more than 25% of what the store usually handled. And this is wise. What we're going to see is we're going to see the numbers of infections increase again. That's what's expected. If they start to go up so dramatically that once again it looks like we're going to go through this healthcare thing, which I think is virtually impossible, by the way, given how quickly it was spreading before. But then we'll stay like this. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think there's going to be a slow, steady increase in number of cases. Let's not forget that every time somebody becomes infected, that person, when they recover, we don't know how long immunity will last, but basically once you've had this and recovered, not only can you not get it, you can't give it. So every single person who gets infected and recovers is a good thing. Now, this is called herd immunity, and probably I should just give you a quick explanation of this. It's difficult to explain to people who don't live in places like Texas or California, but in California, it rains 3 days out of the year. And when it rains, these weeds grow like spectacular. And there's about a 2-week period in the spring where the hills of California looks like Ireland. I mean, they're just emerald green from all this growing stuff. That lasts 3 or 4 days. Then they dry out. And then we don't get any rain for 7, 8, 9 months. And because of the hills, fire likes to go up. Because of the hills out here, and because of the density of the shrubs and the growth, we have a tremendous problems with wildfires out here. Now, it turns out this is a perfect analogy for a virus. So when this virus came, there was nothing but dried bush to the horizon. And that dried bush is fuel for the virus. In the case of the virus, it's uninfected people. It's people with no immunity. Once you set a match to that, it just spreads like wildfire. Just goes and burns and burns and burns. The shelter in place stuff was like a fire break. It's like, okay, fire's coming this way. We're going to go ahead of the fire and we're going to chop down all of this stuff and we're going to clear an area a mile wide. And now the fire's going to have to jump that mile where there's no fuel in there. And that's basically what the stay at home did. But the good news is that if you assume that a well-watered tree won't burn or as easily, imagine a hillside that's nothing but a dried out brush. That's America when COVID-19 came. If half of the country has had it and recovered, then imagine that every other bush on that hill is green and healthy. That fire is not going to travel as fast if every other bush is green and healthy as it would if they were all dried out. Now imagine that only 1 out of 10 of those healthy bushes is dry. The fire can't make the leap. You don't have to have every single bush be green in the same way that you don't have to have every single person be immune. Herd identity means that there's not enough fuel for the virus to make the jump. There's enough green trees out there separating the dried out trees so that the fire can't jump from one to the other. And every day that goes by, we're going to see that. So you're going to see the numbers increase. And the thing I would prepare you for, this is what I'm going to talk about on the Chronosphere Lounge when we get to that. The thing that you need to be prepared for is this. This news media is determined to use this in the way that the Russia investigation wasn't used and the impeachment and all the rest of it. This is their last hope. And so when these cases start to increase again, they are going to be relentlessly telling you that this is Donald Trump's fault and that anybody who gets sick or dies is it's on his hands because we said you should have stayed locked down until January of 2021 or whatever else Bill Gates says. And I figure it's easier to stay locked down to 2021 with $80 billion than it is with $80. So I don't give a damn what he has to say. I don't buy any of that stuff. So what's going to happen, Texas, is you're going to see some increase in cases. And as these cases increase, we need to start building a wall around the people who are most at risk. And rather than quarantining the whole country, we need to be taking a special care of things like nursing homes where there's enormous potential for damage. So I fully suspect that in the next couple of months at the latest, look, if by the 4th of July, if we're not shaking hands and the masks are gone, I'd be completely amazed. I'd be completely amazed if that's not the case by the 4th of July. So for those of you who worry about our civil liberties being gone, we have seen during the last 6-7 weeks of this pandemic, we've seen a lot of cases of abuse of power. The governor of Michigan's she's a tyrant. And they arrested a paddleboarder who was out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They arrested him for violating social distancing laws because he's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But the fact that you can count these cases, the fact that they're news, is an indication that these are cases where individuals have clearly overstepped their authority. Breaking up a church or fining people for going to church is absolutely overreach. But not only was that one case, now Bill Barr says we're going to go after these guys. And so to me, it's been voluntary. And if they'd ordered me to stay at home and put teeth behind it, I'd feel it was my obligation to go out and not. But since basically they asked me, that's what I did. So be prepared for the media onslaught and understand that there is a new way to die in America, thanks to our friends in the Communist Party of China, which, by the way, Zoom is known to be leaked. So since you're watching back in Beijing, you have no idea what you've done. I know you think you do, but you've got no idea what's coming to you. None, you miserable commie bastards. You're going to regret this. Believe me, you're going to regret this. But anyway, that's about it. So I am optimistic, and when enough time comes, 2-3 years from now, what I think we're going to do when we look back at this is we're going to look back at this and we're going to be very thankful for it, because not only is it accelerating the move to people working at home and not in factories and breaking the powers of unions. Lots of kids are being homeschooled who've never been homeschooled before. It's going to break the power of teachers unions and so on. It's going to do a lot of really good things for this country. And the most important thing I think it's going to do is we're going to look back on this and we're going to say that this was a drill. I mean, no, I don't mean to sound flip at all in terms of the people that have died from this. I mean, no disrespect from it whatsoever. But if this pandemic ends up killing 60, 70,000 people or whatever the case may be, it's shown us what we may have to do if we ever got something really serious, something like what we've had to live with our entire lives of our ancestors, yellow fever or smallpox or something like that. Next time a disease looks like it's going to get out, we're going to know how to control it. We're going to know what to do in the early days. We're not going to have to go to anything like this kind of trouble. And so my message concludes by telling you, I would just simply factor in the COVID-19 among the ambient risk of the world. And while it is a small increase, something like some of the numbers are something like 0.03% of the population, it's an increase. It's extra deaths, but don't let that own you. Remember the astonishing risks that all of our ancestors took with diseases like smallpox and yellow fever and all of them that would plague, that would just wipe people off of the earth. We don't live in this era. This is the first time that we've ever fought a virus when we've had the medical ability to understand it. And we have not yet begun to fight. We're going to kick this virus's ass in a way it has no. It picked the wrong species. It should have stayed with the monkeys that stay in the trees, because the ones that walk around on the ground, we are coming after this virus, and we're coming after all of them. So anyway, I'm sure I'll be out there for 4th of July barbecues, and I'm sure you will too. I can go a little bit late if you want to take some questions. I'll just put a little note up saying I'm a little bit delayed. So if you want to take some questions, I need about a minute just to make a quick note, and then we can go a little bit longer.
Okay.
Anyway, that's it. So cheer up, for God's sakes. Don't act like a bunch of crybaby Californians. And we need to keep this private, because if it gets out that the Texans were filled with malaise and they had to call somebody in California to cheer them up, then that's the end of civilization as we know it. And I don't want to go there, and neither do you.
Well, as Texans, we're not used to being told to stay inside.
I know it.
And so yeah, we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So Surf Island Media asks, Bill, going forward, what do you think we should do to protect our liberties and make sure our livelihoods are off limits to the government?
That's a great question. Let me just forgive me. I'm just typing out something I need to put up so that I can push my deadline back so that I can answer these questions. Sorry, I hate the dead air, but this is going to allow me to go on just a little bit longer. And if I try to answer the question, do this at the same time, I'm just going to take me longer. I'm almost there. Sorry. Okay, so this is the issue. This is the entire issue. At what point, the thing I mentioned about how it's harder for me to deal with criticism from the right, when people say you're just one of the sheep, you're just one of this or one of that, it's like, nobody forced me to do this. And unless there were guys with machine guns in your neighborhood, nobody forced you to do it either. We had a very big hot day a couple days ago, and the beaches were filled in California. And instead of arresting people, Governor Newsom, Lord Newsom, or Overlord of California, said, please don't go outside. And when they say, please don't go outside, I respect that. And I treat it a lot differently than I do when somebody says, you will stay in or else. I'll tell you one thing. We have never done this before. And since we've never done this before, we just didn't know what we didn't know. I'll get to the meat of the question, but a lot of people think, well, Fauci's in on this deep government thing and all these other things. It's possible, but you don't need it. In other words, just to wrap up my whole take on the whole thing, that initial model that predicted 2 million American dead if we didn't do something, that doesn't have to be evil. It doesn't have to have been a lie. It doesn't have to have been a political statement. That could have been the very best guess of an epidemiologist who saw something coming and said, we got to do something. Fauci's advice to the president is what Fauci is supposed to be doing. It's not Fauci's job to worry about the economy. Fauci's job is to make sure that the fewest people in the country die. And if Fauci says we won't be able to get past this until July of 2021, then that's what a doctor is saying in order to minimize the number of people that die. But that's not the only equation there. And President Trump has other equations. I think he's handled this brilliantly. So what I mean by this being a drill is that we have we have never dealt with it before. I think I don't think anyone had even the slightest possible estimation of how effective this social distancing would be. I don't think anybody could see that would just take flus to zero, that we close emergency rooms in parts of the country because there weren't enough people sick or hurt. Now, needless to say, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep doing this forever, and we have to go back to our lives as we knew them. But what I do think we're going to find is that some changes have been made. When somebody like Dr. Fauci says we may never end up shaking hands again, I say, well, you may not end up shaking hands in New York City again, but by God, I'm shaking hands for the rest of my life, and I don't want to live in a world where we can't. I'm not going to live in a world where we're all wearing masks all the time. So we've learned some things and so on. I expect what will happen is that we will have learned that this is a circuit breaker that we could throw, and a great deal of it, especially on the back end of the curve, is politically motivated. And there's no question it's politically motivated. I'll just come out and say it. I'll just come out and say what you know and I know and everybody else knows. The media wants as many people to die. Media and the Democrats want as many people to die, and they want as much economic damage as possible because it's the only way that they can drag that galvanized corpse across the line and get back the power that Donald Trump has been so relentlessly destroying for 4 years. And this is the most shameful thing I've seen in American history, that the media, who's supposed to be the antibodies of the system, supposed to root out corruption, that the media has told these lies and told them to such a degree. Um, the the good news is that while the media can create stories and they can create narratives and they can influence the way people think, they cannot, at least not yet, write reality. They can't write it. They can talk about it, but they can't affect it. When this is all over, as Texas starts to go back to work and other countries other states start to go back to work, what we're going to find is that their hysterical bloviating is going to be considerably less bad than what they said it would be, and that's going to make Donald Trump look good. So Texas once again leads the way. We're going to go back to work in Texas. We're going to go back slowly. If we start to see a crazy spike, we'll back it off. And so, to answer your question about civil liberties, I would simply say this. Um, we knew that in World War II, that we were facing an existential threat to this country, that if we didn't do something to stop Nazi Germany or Japan, let me rephrase that. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were worth stopping. They had to be stopped. And because we had to stop them, we ended up doing a lot of things that most Americans are not used to doing. We put up with rationing of gasoline. We grew victory gardens. We worked swing shift. We put women to work, among other things. So, there's a lot of things that we did out of a sense of common sacrifice because we knew we were facing a very, very big threat. 50,000, 60, 70,000 Americans dead is the largest number of civilians that we've ever had killed in this country, with the possible exception of the Civil War. It's not a trivial thing, and we made big sacrifices, but we didn't make big sacrifices for 4 years the way that the Greatest Generation did, and furthermore, we didn't take anything like those casualties either. We didn't have to put stars in the window. We didn't have to do a lot of stuff. So, in terms of the civil liberties, and the freedoms, which is what I'm all about, and the reason you have a Tea Party is to preserve our freedoms. If this had been a political lockdown and not a medical one, then I wouldn't have put up with it, you wouldn't have put up with it, and nobody would have put up with it. If it was simply a power grab, then no one would have put up with it. But it wasn't. It was and remains a real threat to the people of this country. And when I keep coming back to the wisdom of the American people, what that leaves me with is a real firm belief that we have done this pretty much just by feel. We feel like it's time to go back to work now, and none of us are going to stay in much longer, and we know it. We know that these people like the governor of California and New York would love us to have us stay in long enough for the economy to completely crater. We know that's what they want, but we're not going to do it. We're just not. We have done it out of a sense of voluntary American unity at its best, in terms of, we got a serious problem, time to pull together. But now it's time to go back to work. And and every single day that goes by from this point forward, once we're on the downside of that initial curve, every single day that goes forward, any attempt to keep us locked down is more and more clearly a political thing, less and less clearly a medical thing, and deserves more and more pushback. And it's getting it too. Even in California, it's getting it. So they're going to continue to plead with us, but they can't arrest us all. And I'm just telling you about my parking lot rebellion. My parking lot on the day after this lockdown was completely empty, and there've been more cars in the parking lot at my studio every single day. There are more and more cars in that parking lot, and eventually we're just gonna stop. We're just going to go back and doing what we're doing. And while many people think that this adventure, this whole pandemic, has been a blow to American freedom, I think it's been a blow to American tyranny. I really do. I think if you appeal to Americans and say, look, we need your help, they'll do it. But when it comes time to say, and by the way, we think you should do this, 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 and this, and you should keep doing it, then no, you know what? You asked us, we complied, not because you told us to, but because we wanted to help this country get through this horrible crisis. And now we're not going to listen to you anymore. In other words, we know what's good for us. We know what's good for the country. We know what a political order is versus a medical emergency. And we're willing to put up with the second one, and we're not willing to put up with the first one. So go pound sand. What are you going to do? And be prepared for the news media to make Texas into a bunch of idiots who went back too early. And any case that happens, any disease, any sickness, you're going to be pilloried for it. But remember, you're going to be back working and shaking hands while these cowards in the news media are still shaking in their boots in their New York skyscrapers. And who wants to live like that? The only people I've seen scared in this country was the news media. They're the only Americans I've seen that are scared. Scared to the point where they can't function anymore. Everybody else has just basically looked at the risk and said, okay, what can we do? I could take a few more.
Okay, so we have another question here. Uh, Bill, do you think some government officials are exploiting the crisis to destroy small business and the economy overall? I think you probably already answered that one.
Absolutely, they are. There's no question they are. And this is where it starts to get to be a challenge. Um, it is without question what they're trying to do. This idea of never let a crisis go to waste is the most repulsive thing I've seen, and this is a real crisis. And again, folks, you can look on the bright side or the dark side. You can see all of the power plays that these politicians have made. You can see all of the power grabs, the funding for Planned Parenthood, and you can see all of that, right? You can and you can look at all of that. But ultimately, what you really need to look at is there's nobody is going to keep us locked in our houses if we don't want to be there. And and again, Texas leads the way here. Yes, of course they want small businesses to close. And it's easy for people like reporters who are working like they've never worked before, or millionaires, movie stars, to say, oh, we're all in this together. I'm in my $12 million mansion taking a bath in milk, and you're in your home, and we're just locked down together. Stop, please, just stop it. Just shut up. I don't want to hear from millionaires and celebrities about the hardships they're going through. But again, this is the simple. If you could come up with an excuse for a tyrannical takeover of the United States, a pandemic would be it. That would be the one thing you could use that would genuinely scare people for the right reasons. And lo and behold, to the Democrats' amazement and joy, a pandemic appeared. And lo and behold, they did every single thing they could to make the worst of it. And unfortunately for them, when the people listened to President Trump talking about his response, and I think he's handled this masterfully, we didn't know what we didn't know. Did we make mistakes? Of course we made mistakes, but we didn't know what we didn't know. When it's all over, the death toll will be I don't know, who knows, a 20th of what they predicted. President Trump will be able to say, look, here's what they said was going to happen. Here's what actually happened. Uh, and and they have given it their best shot, and they failed. They failed. This is it. This is their opportunity of a lifetime. Everybody listen to us because there's a disease out there. Well, we're not going to listen to you. We'll listen to each other. And now when we feel like it's time to go back to work, we'll go back to work. We saved a bunch of American lives, which is good, something to be proud of. And when it's all said and done, I think we're going to come out of this looking like heroes. And 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 we'll look like heroes not because of what the politicians did, but because of what the people did. How about if we do one more, Tracy, and then I'll get back to my other stuff here.
Oh, that's it for the questions in here. I did have one question, and see if
Sure.
I can remember it. Um, eh, this isn't. It's not just the Democrats who are gleeful on this. I really, this is my opinion. I believe that this is a much broader um, effort. I don't think it was an accident that this has happened, and I just there's too many coincidences, if you will. Um, do you have any inklings like that? I mean, do, uh, I've got my theories, but that they're my theories.
I've got my theories too, and I've studied this an awful lot. Uh, First of all, this virus is real, and it's deadly. That's not fiction. It's not the whole thing is not just a story. Uh, this is a real deal. Um, I am convinced from a number of people and a great deal of very concise evidence that this virus was manufactured. There seems to be virtually overwhelming evidence that a coronavirus that lived in the bat community was genetically altered and given the corona is the spikes that allow it to attach to human tissues. And it looks very, very, very much like they spliced the ability to attach to human tissues onto an unknown respiratory virus. So basically, what they did was they took SARS, which is very, very dangerous, high fatality relatively, but not very contagious, and mix it with stuff that's very contagious but not very lethal. And I have no doubt whatsoever, none, that this came out of the virology lab in Wuhan. And whether it did or not, there's no question that the communists knew for 6 weeks they could have contained this in the world, and they knew for 6 weeks this is coming. They let people travel to the United States for 3 weeks after they stopped allowing people from Wuhan to travel to other parts of China.
Yeah,
This
that's why Italy got hit so bad, because they have a large community in Italy that where China has bought up so much of the businesses there, and they literally have commuter flights running to and from Italy, from
to Wuhan.
China, and from Wuhan,
Yep.
and it
So
literally poured into Italy that way.
every single death from this is at their feet from, and I'm not talking about even a moral point of view now. I'm talking from a legal point of view. When you get down to what a virus is constructed of, and you can prove that 20,000 nucleotides were cut and pasted here, and you could say that no, there's no chance that happened naturally. The
Yeah.
nearest bats to Wuhan are about 70 miles away, by the way, and they didn't sell bats in this market. So China owns every single one of these deaths, and they own the economic damage too. And
Although
frankly,
although the news has shown us pictures of bats in some market somewhere where they claim that they were being sold.
well, that's the news media. But somebody in Texas is suing the Chinese government. The Brits are talking about suing the Chinese government,
Yeah.
and we have a very strong case. Now they'll never pay it because they'll never admit it. But it turns out we're holding a bunch of their money and not the other way around. So we'll just take it off the bill. Why don't we?
Yeah.
And I am never going to buy a Chinese product again. If this had been an accident and they'd handled it with the obligations that they have, then I would say, okay, well, accidents happen, but that's not what happened. We can't simply stop buying Chinese stuff because so much stuff is made in China, but we are rapidly seeing plans for manufacturing to come back to the United States or go someplace else, the supply chain, the global supply chain, it made sense to manufacture parts in China if you could save 4 cents on the widget, on a dollar. Yeah, why not? That's economics. But if it turns out that that it puts your product line at risk, and especially if it turns out that the American people will not buy your product anymore, if you want to save those 4 cents by having made in China on there, then we're going to see a lot of this stuff come back, and it's going to be nothing but good for this country. And it's opened our eyes as to what we're really dealing with out there. And
it's interesting. Donald has been courting India quite a bit lately, and
that's the most important strategic alliance we could have.
And that's the logical place to go if we're going to have partnerships in manufacturing.
Couldn't agree more.
So, well, that's it. This was wonderful. I can't thank you enough for participating, and
I hope you're feeling better out there, guys.
Bringing us some Bill Whittle joy. So, with that, I would invite all of our guests tonight to go check Bill out on Stratosphere Lounge, because it'll be part 2 of this, I'm sure. And with that, I bid you adieu, and I'm sure we'll talk later.
Good to see you. Hang in there, Texas.
Take it easy.
All right.